Hello, and welcome to Authors Die Twice, a podcast on video games and aesthetic theory hosted by two living failures. In this episode, Bryan and I discuss Elden Ring, both the base game and the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. I begin by telling Bryan about an essay that I've been working on recently that's about Elden Ring and the film Solaris by Andrei Tarkovsky. Then we discuss Elden Ring more broadly, considering questions of wonder, of spatial design, and limitation before moving on to the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. We hope you enjoy the conversation. I guess I should backtrack and just contextualize the article a little bit. The piece is um, thinking through this trope, that happens in it happens first in Bloodborne, and I think it's most by far the most effective in Bloodborne. But then, like 1 year later, they do it in Dark Souls 3, and then a few years after that, they do it in Elden Ring, where you basically circle back and find a copy of your hub.
Right,
But
right. Yeah.
it's turns out to actually not be the copy. In fact, the hub that you are familiar with, like that basically has been your home, your home base, and in fact your home throughout the game is the copy. And this is an older sort of precursor version, or like the true version, or the real version.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so thinking about this quite like foregrounded and sort of deliberately uncanny or disorienting trope. I think it's least effective in Elden Ring when it happened. You find the round table hold in Lane Dell, and it feels at that point it's like the third time they've done this, and for me, it just didn't really hit in the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But Elden Ring evolves the trope in another way, which is that it basically takes the same idea of going back to something that you think is a familiar location, but is actually a copy or a double of that location, and makes it an operative principle of a few of the dungeons, the catacomb dungeons.
Hmm.
And there it's like totally without lore. There's no reason for why it's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
kind of pure form. It's like pure mechanical level design, pure structure, but it's using this like really trippy similar effect where it's basically baiting you into thinking that you're coming back to something, but you're actually finding something new. And so I was really fascinated in this just that simple movement, disorienting movement. And I guess it's a long way of saying that Solaris ends with the same the same idea, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a little bit different, and kind of teasing apart the differences has been productive for me for the piece. But have you seen the movie?
Oh yeah. Yeah. A few times.
Yeah, yeah.
It's been a while, but yeah, you're making me. And it's funny because Bennett Sims mentioned Solaris actually, and when I interviewed him,
Oh, cool.
I think in connection with one of his stories that I was asking about. Um, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. I'll have to send you that
That's
interview.
awesome.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no, just kind of going off of that. I'm gonna send a relevant idea in the chat real quick. But going off of that, I also kind of think like this makes me totally think about my ideas about the game when we had that panel, which yeah was I guess like like a year and a half or close to 2 years ago. Which is that like the lore, you know, and perhaps it's like it's partly a function of what you said, right? It's like the tiredness of like the same trope. And the same thing kind of like maybe happens to the lore where the
Hmm.
stakes of the game feel like because the game is so expansive, the stakes feel somewhat compromised or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like finding the copy of the thing in Bloodborne feels like really intense because the game is so like limited in a certain way.
Absolutely.
Whereas in Elden Ring, like finding that other round table hold or whatever. I can't really remember it in Dark Souls 3 because that's not one of the games that I have played through it, but it's been a long time and it wasn't.
It's pretty hidden in Dark Souls 3. I think there's an optional boss, and you need to hit like an illusory wall behind the boss.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
that weird dragon guy who's like related to Seath, maybe from Dark Souls 1. He's like
Mhm.
a dragon wizard. It's not a
Okay.
very good boss fight, I don't think. It's like pretty unremarkable. But then I want to say maybe it's just a door, but I want to say there's like an invisible wall behind him, and it leads to another boss underground in like this kind of dark cavern, and then you find the Firelink Shrine of Dark Souls 3, which is a totally different structure from the one in Dark Souls 1. But you
Right.
find the same shrine. It's pretty uncanny, and it's pretty spooky. Like it's totally dark, like almost really hard to see, and it's the exact layout of the Firelink Shrine that you start in. And this is actually pretty interesting. It's different from Elden Ring and Dark Souls and Bloodborne in that in those two games, like your hub is sort of totally disconnected from the game world. It's totally disconnected from the open world.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but in Dark Souls 3, it's actually there were two Firelink Shrines of an identical layout in separate parts of the open world. So you could just walk from well, actually, that's not true because you need to. Yeah, there is a cutscene, so maybe that you can't do it totally continuously or seamlessly. But
Mhm.
ostensibly, like within the fiction, it's all one physical space, and you can go from the original Firelink Shrine to this weird, like pitch black one that's like underground. Um,
Yeah.
and the idea is that the pitch black one, I think, is like a much older version of the same space, the same shrine.
Right, right.
Again, like your version is sort of the derivative or later. I don't know the actual lore. Like I don't watch the lore videos really ever. But my like reading, I think you find like the old firekeeper's eyes or something of like a former firekeeper, and that's implying that like it's dating it in a way. Like this is a different era, a different historical moment of a prior firekeeper, maybe a prior whatever you call the group of people who are hanging out in the shrine. I forget the terms.
Right.
Um, but yeah, just to flash back to Solaris, like all that was set up for the fact that the movie ends with Chris Kelvin, I think his name is going back down. Actually, his like friend on the station tells him, you should go back to Earth now, and then we see very similar images to what we see at the very beginning, where Chris is at his family house, his father's house, like in this kind of pastoral like pond in the woods. And we see him, it looks like he's back there. It's now winter, the pond is frozen, and he goes up to his house. But then he's realized something weird's going on. His father is inside the house walking around, but there's like water pouring from the ceiling, and his father's just like walking in the water and not responding at all to the fact that he has like a shower going on him while he's organizing his books.
Mhm.
And then Chris goes and embraces his father, and then the camera sort of zooms out, and you see that they're actually on Solaris, that the planet has created this island and replica of, or simulacrum of his home and his father and their dog, funnily enough, on the planet's surface I think as a way of just like communicating with Chris. Um, so it's another fake return, another thing where even within the sort of experience of first seeing the film, you are in a way baited into thinking that he's traversing old ground, right? He's done a loop and he's gone back to where he started, but he's actually in somewhere completely alien, like literally alien. He's on a different planet interacting with this sentient, yeah, planet. So it felt like a productive comparison, to think through. I mean, the uncanny. I'm working with Freud a little bit here too, but
Yeah.
also what's going on with this. It's like a trope of repetition, of duplication and repetition, but also the trope itself is repeated between the three games and then evolved in the dungeon design. In its kind of right now its latest instantiation in the Giant's Catacombs dungeon and the Langdell Catacombs dungeon.
Yeah, the dungeon one is interesting, and I remember you mentioning this to me a while back, like because the dungeons are relatively loreless, right? Like they're pretty, they are like mainly just formal, right? As far as I
I
remember.
think that's right, and I'm sort of making that suggestion in the piece. Like there,
Yeah.
there is. I think there's larger. I really don't know the Elden Ring lore, but I think there's like larger lore of the dungeons. Like there's those roots are in the dungeon, which is implying that all of the dungeons are some way connected to the Erdtree. You
Yeah.
know, and when you beat a boss, it's like that room is where the roots are most visible, and something about I don't know however it works. Runes or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Soul
yeah.
going through the Erdtree or passing through this kind of life and death cycle.
Right, right.
But yeah, that's like there's kind of a general framing for them, and I think sometimes there's significant items in certain dungeons, but yeah, they're pretty like anonymous and copy paste, and I think they treat I would guess that comparatively speaking, the lore works in a similar way.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because yeah, I mean, even insofar as whatever lore they have is definitely, I guess, like you said, it's almost like a form of lore or something. It's not
Yeah.
even like a yeah. So it's yeah. I wonder then like what do you think is like the like what is this kind of repetition trope thing getting at? You know, like I've thought about this certainly too in terms of, you know, it's not just like the actual literal spaces being repeated, but as I'm sure we've talked about before, like the names are so similar with just small differences in many cases, you know, or like even going back to Dark Souls, like there are characters or like bosses with like quite similar names, and especially Elden Ring that's like really ramped up to a kind of absurd degree.
Yeah, there's like Godfrey and then like Godfrey or something, or yeah.
Yeah. Um, all the bosses with M names, and then there are the
Yeah.
bosses that you have to like beat multiple times. I mean, maybe that's a place to talk about the DLC too, where we have like you know, like Radon shows up again, right? Like he shows up at a um as the final boss, which I haven't still haven't beaten, but
Yeah, Radon shows up. There's a boss in the DLC named Ralana, which the first time I just read it as Renala. So I was like, oh, that's weird. We're fighting the same character. Is this supposed to be a big story moment? I didn't know the context enough, but I was like, I didn't remember uh Renala, if that's the one in the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. She's like not mixing it up so much, with like weapons and stuff. And then the version of her or this other character that you fight at the second main boss in the DLC is really it's like a melee boss with two swords and magic effects on the swords and stuff. So I was like really confused, and it wasn't until much later that I realized that it's actually it's a very similar name, but not the same name and not the same character.
yeah, yeah, I'm looking it up right now, and she's apparently the younger sister of Renala, which
Hmm.
just feels so like arbitrary, you know? Yeah, here you go. Yeah, I don't know. I just wonder like what are there's a weird, maybe this is gonna get into maybe more abstract or theoretical territory, but when I'm thinking about like, you know, lore to a certain extent is like history, right? Like lore for a game, a lot of it is just the history of what came to become the thing that you're playing now, right? Uh,
Right.
and so like if you think about you know history, there's so much contingency, and of course like you know we're so far removed from that. So if we're thinking about like world history or history of a particular region or even like a war or whatever, like yeah, sure we you know certain things get sedimented or whatever, but only because of the weird particular like accidents that happen over time, or you know these kind of things that feel very much like hinge points where they could have gone either way or something. Um, whereas the Elden Ring lore feels almost like I don't know, even just with the naming conventions, they feel like they're kind of like trying to counteract that in a certain way. Like you know, we're not just gonna have Renala, we're gonna have Ralana, and then we're gonna have you know Murgot, but also Margit, right? Like we're
Right. It's
gonna
like
have
permutative almost.
yeah, like almost like a yeah, like it's like a cancerous lore or something where they just want to keep you know, we could imagine a version where it's like how there's always more Pokemon or something anytime you check in. Where there's gonna be more Elden Ring like lore, you know, every
Yeah,
time.
Norala. That needs to be a Norala.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man. I mean, how does this compare to like, you know, I think about like, because for me, like, you know, Dark Souls still is maybe my favorite one, partly just because I played it first. And, you know, I just remember the first time I played it, it was something totally new that I had never, you know, never played anything like that before ever, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but if I think about like, what about it? beyond that, I really love. It's partly how limited it feels, and I think like a similar thing applies to Bloodborne for sure, but it feels so limited in terms of uh yeah, feels limited in the way that, like a narrative feels limited, right? It doesn't feel like
Yeah.
totally open world. I mean, it is in certain ways an open world, but in other ways, as I'm sure we've talked about elsewhere, it's totally, there are limits everywhere, right? And there even that point is kind of even like parodied within the game, right? There's that bizarre section, I think it's near the second bell uh in Dark Souls, where there's like this like seemingly it's a doorway, but it doesn't go anywhere or something,
Mhm.
right? Like there's this hallway that just like ends in a dead end. Uh
Yeah, you mean like with the chaos switch?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Um
there's actually a way to open that door, but I think you have to like play in the multiplayer or something. I'm going deep in my Dark Souls 1 knowledge, which is like many years out of date.
okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, but no, I know what you mean. Yeah. And I agree. Like I mean, Bloodborne's my favorite. I go back and forth. Dark Souls was the first that I played, and it was like that, I played it really late. I think we've talked about this. I played it in 2018. Had never played a Souls game,
Yeah.
and just like totally hit me really hard. I mean, confused the hell out of me and frustrated me to no end. But it really was like just a deep kind of like emotional experience almost.
Mhm.
Had real highs and lows for sure. But Bloodborne is the one that to me, I think limited is the right word. I would also say like intentional, like just Bloodborne just feels so intentional. And it also has almost no repetition whatsoever. I mean, aside from the Chalice dungeons, which I think are great,
Yeah.
I think they're actually quite underrated.
Mhm.
I wish Shadow of the Erdtree in particular had some sort of analog to the Chalice dungeons, like some kind of endlessly replayable mode where you can just kind of work on your build and test builds and continue to level up without going into New Game Plus.
Yeah, yeah.
But the sort of the game world itself of Bloodborne is so tight, despite having a pretty uniform Gothic style. It's incredibly varied within that under that larger umbrella. And what I really love about it is just like its feeling of singularity. Even in like Dark Souls, you can get like two of the same weapon. I think right, you can get like two short swords or some generic crappy
Yeah, yeah.
weapon.
Yeah.
And in Elden Ring, you have like I have like seven Lanedale street swords or whatever, like at any given time. And it's just like feels like you're just picking up garbage. And Bloodborne just doesn't
Mhm.
have that. There's no duplication. Like I think there are a couple trick weapons that you can get a second one in the Chalice dungeons. But otherwise, every item is placed intentionally. It has its own animations. It's totally singular. It feels special when you get it. And that's a kind of like it exemplifies what I love about that game, which is that everything feels special and unique in its own way. Um, and that comes out of the limitation.
Yeah.
I love Elden Ring to death. I think it's the most fun of all the games for sure. And it's the one that I think I had the most intense feelings of like wonder and actually kind of ecstatic feelings the first time I played it. Like there were like 10 moments where my jaw was on the floor and I felt like this is the best thing I've ever played.
Sure.
Um, but it also does have that repetitive nature that just comes from the sheer size of it. And the catacombs are a version of that. Like the catacombs all are basically the same. They use the same tile sets.
Mhm.
And that's as far as I got with the thinking for this piece, and my hope is that I'm going to get beyond it because I'm not satisfied with this as an endpoint. But my argument in the talk was that this is this way of repeating or presenting um, new spaces as if they were old spaces, or trying to get you to think that is a sort of laying bare of how repetitive these dungeons already are, in that
Yeah.
even if the game weren't trying to make you do this, you already probably feel this whenever you go into a dungeon. And when we feel that normally in a dungeon, we think of it as being essentially unintentional. It's like, oh, this is just how games work. Like this is C tier content. Like I a lot of times I play Elden Ring without going into a single catacomb unless there's like a talisman or something that I need, because they're just once you do them once, they just feel a little bit boring, and they
Yeah,
all
yeah.
are so samey. But when you encounter that sameness you just think of it as like a technical or development or just medium level constraint. Like, yeah, this is an open world game. Stuff's going to repeat, textures repeat, assets repeat.
Mhm.
It's just like in Skyrim, how every village looks the same,
Yeah.
you know? But what these particular dungeons do is they reactivate the uncanniness of that repetition. Like they actually make you think like you're going crazy or like your space is warping in a way that it shouldn't, or that you're just utterly disoriented. And reactivating that uncanniness, I think, is a powerful move and a powerful moment, you know? I mean, I think of like Victor Shklovsky and the notion of estrangement or laying bare the device, was how I thought through it in the talk. I'm trying to cut that out because I'm tired of talking about Shklovsky, but um, I do want to get beyond defamiliarization at some point. I think it's interesting doing this, but I would like, I think they're also doing something else. And this goes back to the relationship, I think, between this dungeon design trope and this other trope that's more thematized, it's more memorable, right? Like people remember finding the old abandoned workshop in Bloodborne in the way that they might not remember just a random Chalice dungeon or catacomb.
Hmm.
Like these are mic drop moments for these games, in a way. And it's just so striking that the games are obsessed with that moment too. Like they're just repeating, it's like compulsively repeating this one uncanny return. So I'm trying to figure out like why are the games so obsessed with that? And maybe by figuring that out, that might shed some light on why they then operationalize it in these very otherwise like unexciting cookie cutter dungeons.
I mean, this bears totally on like the game's narrativity or like modes of narrativity because like in a certain way, like you're saying that the dungeons like activate, those particular dungeons activate something that makes them undungeony or whatever, right? Which
Mhm.
which which then puts us back into narrativity. Because I think of like the dungeons as being totally unnarr when you're grinding an Elden Ring or any of these games, like that's no longer narrative. That's when you put on a podcast or put on music or so even as a player, those times when you're either in a dungeon or you're just grinding to try to level up so you can go kill a boss, it's totally task oriented and I would say therefore partly unnarrative because I tend to think
Yeah.
of narrative as actually like less task oriented, like narrative is when we, as a player at least, like this kind of mimetic narrative thing. Like I feel narrative when I am trying to like go around the world and partly also actually feeling that wonder when I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go and maybe I do like in the game stumble across something that I didn't expect there. But if I'm in the dungeon, then that feels like I'm being almost taken out of the game. Like I'm playing, it's when I'm most gaming, but I'm being taken out of the game the most at the same time or something. Um,
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it sounds like this is maybe I'm reading into like, your literary work, but I do get the sense you're using narrative in a pretty unconventional way, which is like maybe more about kind of immersion and atmospheric experience of the represented world,
yeah,
you know?
I think
Like
so. Yeah.
because and I think you're right. I completely understand what you're saying because I mean, a lot of the classical theories of narrative are actually just like really, really excessively goal oriented.
Yeah.
Even in like a writer's workshop, it's like the story is about a character that wants something, and it's about trying to get that thing. A character should have an objective.
Hmm.
Narrative comes out of conflict, which is really about conflicting objectives. These are kind of just like platitudes of creative writing, but
Yeah.
they're also like actual rules, like novels do follow these in a way or stories.
Right.
Um, and you're pointing out like, but there's another kind of narrative which is not goal oriented, which is just like experiencing the space as what it is and not just as this kind of abstract structure for like getting grinding souls, and like listening to podcasts or music.
Well, this this
Um,
is this is all. Well, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that like this is also the thing that I'm so allergic to whenever I'm, you know, especially like reading or listening to people talk about games is but the same thing happens in music too, like this, and you've written about this kind of false sense of identification, like I have never once identified with, not just in Dark Souls or whatever, because those are famously unidentifiable with characters, right? Like the or as you said, I think last time we were talking, they're almost like mechs or something, right?
I got that from Waypoint Radio. I think it was like Patrick Klepek. I think you said this. You've listened
Okay.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, yeah, I think of my character in Souls as like a mech who I just like slot like stuff into, which I think is it's such a good way of thinking about how, one's disposition or attitude towards their avatar in these games. It's certainly
Yeah.
how
Yeah,
yeah,
no, well, me too, but I mean, I also think like I could be playing I can't imagine a game that I would play where I felt like I totally identified with the character, you know? Like,
yeah.
and it's the same thing with reading literature, or watching TV. And it's so odd because it makes me wonder, is there something wrong with me where I don't do this, or do people actually do this, or did someone at some point say something about identifying with a character and now everyone just kind of pays lip service to that idea? I don't know. But
Yeah.
I suppose I guess what I'm saying is that like this idea that the idea of narrativity that I'm talking about kind of like gets away from this idea that we can just flatten our experience as the player and the experience of the character that we're playing into the same thing because they're not. And what I mean is like when I'm talking about this heightened narrativity, and I think you've already touched on this or kind of read this into what I was saying, is yeah, it's an experience that, I have as a player while I'm experiencing the game and controlling the game and looking into this game that I'm playing. It's not like I'm not talking about that goal-oriented whatever type of narrativity. I'm totally talking about this like, you know, I think you come through on it to, or come through it to the other side where it does become identifiable, but you have to like pass through something. I think like what you said about Bloodborne and how, yeah, you do pick up repeat objects, but it's blood vials and, bullets and stuff like that. It's not 7 billion of the same sword, which is what makes Bloodborne therefore way more realistic than Elden Ring. Uh,
Mm.
I think like precisely what makes Elden Ring like, sure, fun to play in a certain sense or whatever, but also like way less realistic is that there's never a scarcity of resource and in the first place there are so many different items and you get so many copies of every single item and you can just go anywhere at any time. Not to mention your horse thing can double jump or whatever, like uh I don't know. Does that all kind of make sense though? Like
That totally makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah. And I want to like almost my sort of I think I'm sort of making your point more vulgar, but for me it's like narrative can just be having an authentic experience of the world,
yeah,
like
yeah.
that is narrative because you're existing within a fictional place. It
Mhm.
doesn't need to be about story or advancing plot. And
Yeah,
that's why I'm so struck by your phrase like undungeoning the dungeon, because I take that to mean, I think you even said this, like to narrativize the experience of existing in the dungeon is precisely to undungeon it, because when we dungeon, we're just like grinding, or we're just like, let me just get through this catacomb and like find an
yeah.
item and get
Yeah,
the
because
soul.
there's a formula, like I mean, in a
Exactly.
way, in this way that I don't mean narrative, it's narrative in the sense that, oh, well, my goal is I need to get to the end of the dungeon. I know I'm gonna have to go, however many floors down, and then I'll kill this minor boss at the end or whatever. I'm gonna have to
Exactly.
kill that
Yeah, and like, oh,
jumping
sorry.
stone cat thing or whatever.
Dude,
Um,
yeah, those things are really hard too. The watchdog of the old lords. I hate those things. Um, but yeah, I mean, I said I was tired of talking about Shlavsky, but that actually, undungeoning the dungeon is kind of like it's like the opposite of what he says about literature or poetry, like that literature or art makes the stone stony, you
yeah,
know. But the point is precisely that like we lose with our habitual encounter with the stone makes us forget or overlook or just ignore its actual sort of immediate physical, unique sort of even like essential qualities as a thing in the world, as a stone, as a thing that we can experience.
right.
And art revitalizes that by breaking us out of our habitual perceptions.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like undungeoning is kind of doing the same thing. It's like, which would just mean that a dungeon is sort of the opposite of an authentic gaming experience, if you follow that line all the way, or at least an authentic narrative experience, as in the way that you mean it. And I do think that
Yeah.
that's right. Like, I feel. Yeah, I mean, I've never once, I mean, other than these dungeons in Elden Ring, like I've never once in these catacombs had any kind of like authentic experience in them. If I can just be really generalizing or abstract,
Yeah,
they're
sure.
just pure, they're just like kind of like fun tasks. Um, they're not visually stimulating for one. I mean, if I can just like complain about the dungeons a little bit,
Yeah, yeah, go for
the complaints are a little bit overstated, in that most big games have repetitive tiles and repetitive locations and textures, and actually Elden Ring does a pretty good job of switching it up. Like you have your caves, you have special dungeons like the dungeon where everyone's fighting each other. You have the dungeon in the snow area with like the I think it's like a dragon under the ice. You can like see the dead dragon under the ice, which is a really cool effect.
it. Yeah.
Um, and then in the DLC, there's some really cool dungeon designs, like with the light and dark, and with Death Blade, I think the frenzy, whatever the equivalent of madness in Bloodborne is, where you build the stat, and then if it goes all the way, you like suffer some terrible fate.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, my main beef with the dungeons in Elden Ring is that they populate them with the worst possible enemies.
Hmm.
So it's just like those shitty little gremlins, the gargoyles that are really tanky and they're short, so it's like hard to hit them, and they're just not fun to fight at all.
Yeah,
The thing about the Chalice dungeons is that they are full of like really fun, cool enemies. And in fact, they're so full of unique enemies that are found nowhere else in Bloodborne. Like there's like Dark Souls enemies down there, basically like trolls and fire wizards and like weird, freaky stuff that just never appears on the surface.
yeah,
So not just is there that fun of discovery, but also just like fighting them is way more fun. Like fighting in the Elden Ring dungeons is just a slog. I love the Neo games, and sometimes I like think, maybe I just treat these Elden Ring dungeons like I'm playing Neo, because every Neo level looks exactly the same, and you fight the same like limited selection of enemies, basically, especially if you're doing like multiple cycles of New Game Plus. And
hmm
I love, it's just always fun because the combat's so fantastic. And Elden Ring has great combat too, but it doesn't shine in the dungeons because the enemies suck so much.
yeah.
Um, sorry, long rant over.
No, no, I think it's I mean, I think it's worth talking about this because this does like go back to unlocking what exactly we're talking about when we talk about this game, you know. I think it's easy, I guess it's just easy to kind of forget that and you talk about this in your Game Wonder piece, right? Like there's a certain I guess technical aspect or there's a technical kind of wonder or this kind of idea of I'm definitely butchering your point, but just to paraphrase bluntly, there's this kind of like technical wonder that we can have when we're playing a game where uh, there's wonder that I mean, to like kind of merge what you and I think maybe Aristotle said about wonder, like there's wonder that the game exists at all, there's wonder that like it was possible ever to like make this and that we can move around in it and all this stuff, but then I
For
think
sure.
there's like the anytime we're ever engaging with any kind of art, right? I think like what's the most interesting is the particular experience of any given subject who's engaging with it, right? Whether that's literature or music or a game. And I think that like the wonder that we personally have, or subjectively have when we're playing a game like this is something totally totally different from, but I also think like is more worth interrogating than just like the technical wonder of how, amazing it looks or whatever, And I think that wonder is like precisely a narrative wonder. Like
Yeah.
that's what I mean. That's like partly, not only, but partly what I mean too by narrative, right? Like, and so I can imagine having narrative wonder at realizing that you're in a dungeon that like within itself seems to be, undungeoning or whatever, but also like at the same time, like more of a dungeon because it looks like more the same, or like it kind of like entraps. I mean, it reminds me of there's a short Borges story where he talks about how uh, I mean, the point basically is that there are these two kings, and one of the kings entraps the other king in like a labyrinth, and it takes him all night to get out of it or whatever. And then that king, to get his revenge, just drops the first king in the desert, and he says basically like the desert is like the one labyrinth that you can't get out of because it all just looks totally the same.
That's amazing. I don't know that one. That's incredible. The desert is the one labyrinth you can't get out of.
Something like that, yeah, or it's the most difficult one, to traverse or to navigate. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But yeah, I'm not really sure where I was going with that, I guess. But
No, I mean, I had a couple thoughts about Wonder, but first, just as like as a side note, I do think, if we ever did end up publishing this or whatever or releasing it, I feel like Undungeoning should be the title. It's such a good word.
yeah,
Um, but and, Wonder, I just wanted to say quickly, like on Wonder, I would say like I think we're alike in this and that the thing that like I want to say the number one thing I look for in a video game is good combat. That's
mhm,
probably true, but maybe the number two thing or 1A is a sense of wonder. And it's precisely this kind of wonder that's both technical and narrative in the way you're using it or experiential about
mhm.
just like this kind of immediate engrossment in the represented fictional reality. And
Yeah,
like, I feel myself being hard on Elden Ring, and it's really easy to be hard on that game because it's so big, it's so ambitious, and it's so imperfect in its ways. But like again, no game has made me feel wonder in the way that Elden Ring has ever.
yeah,
Like in terms of the number of times that my jaw was on the floor, it's Elden Ring dwarfs everything in my entire history of gaming. And what's weird is just how hard it is for me to recapture that now. Like, which is why for me, the game, I can never decide whether it's like my second favorite Souls game or like my seventh favorite Souls game, because that is a kind of like one-time experience. It's hard to repeat it. And the more you play Elden Ring, when I've played it for 500 hours, like I have so many completed files on it,
yeah,
you do start to just treat it in purely goal-oriented terms. Like when I play Elden Ring now, I'm just like, honestly, I think about my build and then I look up like, okay, where do I get, the green turtle talisman? I know where to get that, but where do I get, the talisman that's good for whatever, parries or good for rather critical hits, or the talisman that's good for jump attacks, and then like I want a health talisman or I want like a casting speed or whatever. And I honestly just write them down on a Word doc. And then I print it out and like I'm an old man. And then I play through the game and I check off the things that I got. And then, I can finish a file now in like, 20 hours or less, like, all the remembrance bosses or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
Which, it's like that's long for like God gamers, but I feel like pretty good about whatever, like just completing an Elden Ring file in 20 hours or less. And it's just purely just like I'm just beelining to the places I want to go and skipping everything else. Um, and that maybe that's a transition to the DLC because one thing that I replayed the DLC, I've played it 3 times now. One thing that I really found interesting about playing the DLC this time, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this because this was not at all my experience the first time. The upgrade system in the DLC is revolves almost entirely around these shadow tree or shadow, I think it's technically shadow tree
yeah, yeah,
fragments.
yeah.
And then the revered spirit ashes, which is for upgrades your summons.
Mhm.
And those give like a flat bonus to your stats, and it's a really strong bonus. So like you're leveling up a lot in the DLC, but that's pretty negligible, unless you're trying to reach stat requirements for magic or items or weapons. It's really all about those fragments. And so the first time I played the game, I played it pretty organically. I was the DLC I was exploring, had a lot of thoughts about just world design and whatever. But as far as the kind of addictive cycle of upgrading goes, which is for me is actually a big part of why I like these games,
Yeah,
it was always fun to find a fragment that felt really rewarding. But there's no good way to keep track of it, and that's frustrating too. So I finished my first run and I was still missing several, and I just had no way of finding like which were the ones that I missed. You can go online and find the list, but there's so many of them that it's just really tedious to go to every single location.
yeah,
Um, so what I did for this run is in advance, again, like an old man, I printed out a Word doc that had, I organized it myself. I took like, an hour to do this, like by location, kind of by rough sequence of where you go where in the DLC. Like just a kind of like quick guide to getting all of the fragments so I wouldn't miss them because my OCD would kick in. I would be so pissed if I had like 39 of the 40 fragments or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and then I just played the game like Mario. Like I literally played it like I was collecting stars, or something. Like so I was just platforming around. I would like run on torrent and like run by enemies, just like snag the one fragment and check it off my list and then run to the next place.
Yeah.
Um and the DLC does have this kind of vertical design. It has lots of actually has real platforming. And it has that, there's so much variation. There's like, it's like 4 floors deep at points. The world map itself is like 4 floors deep.
Yeah.
And so it does kind of feel like a platforming game or like a Mario. Um,
Mhm.
and so that was my big revelation of this playthrough was like, oh, Shadow of the Erdtree is basically Mario 64. But I wasn't sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm still on the fence about that. It does feel pretty rote at times. It feels, I was literally ticking off boxes. Um, but I appreciate that you don't have to go through the whole cycle of like grinding and thinking about where to allocate stats and that sort of thing too every time.
Yeah, I mean, I like so like I said, I haven't killed the final boss of it yet. But I also like I'm not sure if I've even gone to everywhere because like you were mentioning, there are so many weird, places that you can get down to or up to or whatever. And I also just got to say that the way you're describing playing the game sounds like it sucks. Uh, but no, I get it because I've also done the same, I've obviously done the same thing, which is
I mean, I probably look like a little kid playing Elden Ring, like a hyperactive,
no, I
like
imagine you like calling the what was it? They used to have like a Nintendo hotline or whatever. Um asking for tips or like buying those magazines that had the cheat codes in them or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It would be like the old microtransactions would be like buying a magazine to get access to your cheats.
Yeah, yeah. But of course that's the thing. It's like there's no you're motivated in that only by a certain completionism, which is something else entirely. Like there's not as you just meant, you mentioned recently, like you've never played those games online really. So it's not like you're,
Never.
trying to like go up on a ranking, leaderboard or something like that. So it does have still a little bit of saving grace to it. But no, I mean, I've done the same thing in certain, actually with the DLC a little bit because at a certain point, I just like stopped. I hadn't played it for a while. I think I had stopped playing it, and then um, around like Halloween time, I started playing Bloodborne again. So I like kind of paused on the DLC, and then when I went back to it, I was just like not sure where exactly I was, and then turns out I still had like a ton of the DLC to play, and I only really was able to figure that out by doing a little bit of digging online. Um, I mean, but this is the thing though. This is why I think it's like frustrating, but also really points out something about this game in particular, but also like how we play games and what it means to to have or what kind of experiences we can have with the game, which is that of course there are all these immediately once a game comes out, something like I can only really think of Elden Ring as like the biggest example of something like this that I've benefited from or looked at or engaged with at all is these huge guides like just like player generated guides of where to go, where everything is, what's the best build. There's all these uh
Like
almost like
Extra Life or
yeah, there. I mean, but there are a bunch though. Yeah, but there's that one, but there are so many. Like all covering the same thing. So basically, just like the old school game guide that you could buy, except it's all like open access online. And
yeah,
I mean, it's weird. It's weird. I mean, it feels still, and I know this is not true, but it still somehow feels to me not like I don't mean cheating as in like I shouldn't be looking at it, but it just feels like even in the first place to have all of that available to me feels like weird or like feels like it shouldn't happen, like if I was I mean because the way the game is made, and of course there's no erasing the internet or there's no like there's it's not like we're all put into a box when we start playing the game and we can't communicate with other human beings. But I mean, I imagine it like brings me back to the time where I played Dark Souls, where I wasn't looking at any of that stuff. Like I wasn't like when it first came out, I remember like really trying not to look at anything like that. I'm sure at certain points I probably did like look, Google some stuff or whatever. And I think at a certain point, I think I maybe got like the game guide or something. But I don't know. It just makes me imagine, I wish I could play through all these games with like no internet access or something and actually, because I mean, what do you think? What would that do to the wonder that we might feel in those games?
Yeah, I think it would definitely enhance it. That's how I played the first Dark Souls. I got into Dark Souls. I was a huge gamer and when I was younger and then in high school, and then I basically just like I really fell off it. And I would play a game maybe every couple of years. Like I played the Uncharted games when like Uncharted 2 came out, and I thought that was awesome. Like Mass Effect 2, but I missed so many other of the big games basically between 2007 and like 2019 or
Mhm.
2018. And then 2018, I inherited my brother's PS4 when he went to grad school. And he was like, the two games that I had on there that that I wanted to play were God of War, the 2018 God of War, and Dark Souls. I was a huge fan of the original God of Wars. So I started with God of War and had a great time, had a pretty good time. And then went to Dark Souls, which was a bit of a whiplash because God of War was at the time like completely cutting edge, incredible sort of Sony polish and technical wizardry, whereas Dark Souls looked like shit, like it's like an ugly game, and it's a 2011 game basically that I'm playing in 2018 on the remastered version,
Yeah.
where everything was like shiny, like all the textures are shiny. It's really off-putting. Uh, and but I don't know. I think just because I was out of the gaming loop, I wasn't reading a lot about games. I didn't like know about Reddit really. I just experienced Dark Souls completely cold. I had no idea what was in the game, how the game worked. And I somehow avoided like looking stuff up, even though I think it was like sheer stubbornness at a certain point. I made this like terrible, I'm sorry, I'm just like narrating my Dark Souls experience now, but
No, go for it.
uh, I made this terrible, I think understandable, but also now in retrospect hilarious mistake, which is that at a certain point, I think it was Sen's Fortress or something. I felt like I was patting myself on the back for doing something, overcoming some challenge or finding a chest that was off the beaten path that had a lightning spear in it. And I was like, well, in most fantasy RPGs, if I do something difficult and get a weapon with magic as a reward, that's probably a good weapon, like, so let me just pour all my resources into this weapon. Um, of course, like Anne Orlando is the next big area, and the boss there is like the hardest boss in the game, the dual boss, and Ornstein and Smaug or Smaug. I don't,
Yeah,
I'm
right.
sure how to pronounce it. But they're lightning element, whatever. Or at least Ornstein is lightning element. So I just could do zero damage. I poured everything I had into this lightning spear build. I just was chipping away at them. I couldn't even get, anywhere near the second phase of that fight. And I was on this for like a week. Like just I tried everything. I tried using the columns, I tried cheesing, and just couldn't do it. And that was the one case where I think my brother told me, it's okay to look something up. It's my younger brother. He's like 6 years younger, but or maybe he just yeah, maybe he said something like you should keep playing because the game still it stays really good. You're going to want to see what's beyond it. So I did look up strategy, and someone was like, "Oh, get the Zweihander sword and level that up." And that was a revelation. It's a very easy sword to get in the starting area, and it's like basically a basic greatsword, and it was doing like exponentially more damage than my rare lightning spear. So that was a learning moment. But through all of that, that was the only thing I ever looked up. And I say this because I feel like I've said this to you before, but it's just such a foundational experience of the series for me. Um, the moment after beating Ornstein and Smog, where I learned that I would actually have to kill like those demigods from the opening cutscene.
Yeah.
It's like It's the Seath, the Scaleless, and some of them are not quite who you fight, but it's some embodiment of them.
Hmm.
I was genuinely shook. Like I was like, there's no way. There's no way. If like I couldn't even beat the Iron Giant. Like, how am I gonna beat like a literal god, you know? And it was a true experience. It was a true experience of awe and like terror. And it feels so goofy, but it was so authentic. Like it was so real. And of course you're gonna fight those guys. Like it's the most cliche thing. Like of course, like the introduction, the roll call in the opening cinematic is like naming the big bosses you're going to fight. And now we know, right, that every Souls game basically does that.
Yeah,
Elden Ring, but it's almost like it's playing on that expectation, maybe the opening cinematic.
right.
Um, and so, yeah, like I should have known. Like, you know, of course you're gonna fight the cool or powerful looking creatures you see at the beginning. But I had been so beaten down by the game at this point, and so denaturalized, like where I just had no idea what to expect. I did not understand the game's logic. That I was like, well, this is probably a game where you don't do that. Those are just the gods, you know. Like I don't have to fight them. Like I'm just gonna keep fighting these minions who still kick my ass every time. So yeah, like that was just such a special experience. And it's something that would have been totally, yeah, if I had seen from the beginning that that's where I was going, if I knew the overall roadmap of the game or the sequence of areas and encounters, it would have been totally ruined.
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean for me, at least in my own experience and kind of stuck in my head. That's what the beauty of Dark Souls is, you know. Like I definitely had like pretty minimal, at least the first time I played through it, pretty minimal engagement with any kind of, you know, foreshadowing or anything like that. And so like, you know, I do remember, um, and you write about, you know, gated areas quite a bit, and or you know, you mention it in the Game Wonder piece, and I definitely think that's like something that's pretty essential to feeling that kind of game wonder, you know. And I think the hugeness of Elden Ring kind of defeats that in a certain way because like certain things are gated in ways that are like just literally impossible to know, you
Yeah.
know? Like in the DLC, I remember there was like something I had to do to open up a place and I had to eventually look it up and there was no way that I would have figured it out. Like the thing I had to do was like I don't know exactly what it was. Maybe I had to burn some tree or something and I just
Right.
remember that like doing that was so far from the place that I was trying to get to or just it
But yeah,
felt
that's how you get to what did you call it? Illust Eric?
yeah, right? But that it's not like that's right next door or something, you know,
No, it's not. You can see it from where you burn the kindling or what. I've played the game, the DLC so many times now. I know what you're talking about, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
totally counterintuitive. Like it's completely across the map from, and you have to go back to the original, like the first dungeon that you traverse. You know,
Yeah.
it's a pretty weird structure actually.
But the going back to like the limitedness, I guess, of some of the older From Software games, then like there's something really nice about the, you know, the gatedness of certain places is like just difficult enough, you know, but not like astronomically difficult so that we can actually, you know, figure out how to uh, you know, open up the gate to Sen's fortress so that that onion helmeted guy can get inside, you know. Um,
Exactly. And oh, go ahead.
No, no, that I think that's all. Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, it's a great example because, like, all Souls fans like remember that guy sitting in front of that gate. You know, it's like by dint of sheer repetition, or just, I mean, it's partly that, partly the character design and the performance and the visuals of that weird knight sitting in front of those locked doors and going or whatever he says. Um,
Still closed, he says.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. But it's, you know, you pass through, that's like, you know, that little blacksmith area in the whatever it's called, the Undead Parish, I think,
Mhm.
where you're just it's like the spine of the world for a long portion of that game. You're going
Yeah.
up and down to access all these different places, then you just pass that gate, and it's just like that gate is seared into your memory. It's like, okay, here's the gate. How do I open that gate? You know? And that's a really special, like, Souls, you know, distinctively Souls experience of like having that one door in mind of like, okay, I got to get back to that door sometime. Like, let me see if I can open that door now. Maybe the door opened, like because some world event occurred. You
Mhm.
know, that's how it is in Bloodborne. But you just don't, yeah, you don't really get that in the open world of Elden Ring. and when you do, it's confusing because there are so many options. You're totally right about that. Um, I was going to ask quickly, just I don't think we've ever talked about this, but how old were you when you played Dark Souls 1? Because I was like 20, my late 20s. Like I was old, I was way behind the times.
Yeah, I must have been. I was in high school. I don't know how old I would have been exactly, but yeah, I don't know, 16 or 17 maybe.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it was like exactly, I mean, it immediately like, I don't know, I got the game and started playing it, and I think pretty much immediately, like as soon as especially after I got out of that first area, it felt like a version of something that only in my head had existed, like, in an imaginary way before then or something.
That's awesome.
Because it feels like, and this is something I've like talked about and thought about for a long time, but it feels like a fantasy, not like fantasy novel version, but just like a fantasy or imaginary version of like the medieval, in like a
Yeah.
clearly in like a really like modern way, but like, and obviously like, your character isn't like constantly dying from scurvy or dysentery or whatever would have been afflicting people. So it's not like, realistic in that way, but just the way that the sounds in the game, like the what everyone's always doing, and uh the way that some of the landscapes look, especially like the opening, all the green parts of the game felt really I don't know, I just remember getting to like the bonfire and being like, oh man, like
Yeah.
cool.
And that guy with the thick haircut, that guy's pretty medieval.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know who I'm
yeah,
talking about? Like the faith guy. Um,
yes, yeah.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say too, like because my before that my maybe reference point would have been like, uh Oblivion or Skyrim or whatever,
That is the reference point. Yeah.
which like doesn't, which I think Dark Souls does something entirely different, and again weirdly like more atmospheric, more uh aesthetically interesting. And I wonder, I mean, maybe this is something that we'll have to like continue talking about next time. Like maybe we can also talk more about gameplay, I think, next time. Because I think like actually comparing like the Elder Scrolls games and then like Dark Souls and some of those games could be interesting in terms of gameplay.
Absolutely.
Because like
Yeah.
the way that those games are played is so different, so clunky, and so uh, I don't know. There's something about them that feels, on the one hand, yeah, sure, maybe more quote unquote realistic, like mechanically, but on the other hand, like totally not, like there's something that takes you out of it because of how maybe like realistic they seem. And I think there's like a weird negative effect that happens in games that we've touched on the different aspect of it being, like the dungeon thing and the narrative thing, but I think like gameplay too is certainly part of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think we should continue this and talk about gameplay. It just makes me think of, I have a close friend where I work, and she plays a ton of Skyrim, and she plays it in such a interesting way. It's not how I play the game. And when she watches me play or has seen me stream like Skyrim, or maybe just watch me play it, and she's like, "You play this game like a maniac." What are you doing? So maybe we could, yeah, maybe we could bring her on too. I don't know.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah,
but I
that'd
was
be
gonna say, just your initial. I love that description of like a fantasy world that only existed in your head, because there is something. It's precisely like its obscurity, and its incompletion that makes the game makes Dark Souls and the Souls games in general just so they just have such a feeling, and I think it's like partly it's like it's just like that deep, palpable, like thick feeling that they give you. It just like hits you in the stomach, at least for me. And definitely in the first Dark Souls, and even Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne. I do think it starts to dissipate by Dark Souls 3. Um, But I was just gonna say that like before I knew anything about Souls, when I the only one I played was Dark Souls, and I was trying to tell my friends about it,
Hmm.
who were not gamers. It's just you just made me realize something that I'd forgotten about, since I have became obsessed with this series. That back when I was a novice, the first thought I had, like the first thing I thought was notable about these games was that they are Western fantasy, but from a Japanese perspective, like made by a Japanese team.
Yeah,
Um, and I do think that level of difference is really productive and interesting, and like that's just not Elder Scrolls. I was a huge Skyrim and Oblivion fan. I played hundreds of hours of those games.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, like just the the difference, of the From Software games. I do think it's really important to actually think about. It's not something that's talked about all that much, actually, especially as they become more and more culturally dominant in the kind of game space.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah,
like just the Japanese-ness of these games in a way.
yeah, yeah. I have like one. I think maybe we can. Sorry, hold on. I think maybe we should wrap it up in a second, but I have one unrelated but like parting thought that I just don't want to forget about, which is that if we are going to speak more about gameplay across different games, which I think like we just in general should, um, I think earlier you said that you some what I don't know exactly what you said, but you said something about like Dark Souls and Elden Ring gameplay and how gameplay is really, or sorry, combat, how combat is
Mhm. Yeah.
really important to you. And I agree, like I like the combat a lot, but I definitely like something about the games to me, like I don't know if this is actually true or not, but I would maybe partly say that the combat at times feels like an excuse to remain in the world of the game, like to have
Yeah.
something to do while being just in the game. Like I definitely like I wonder, I don't know, that's a bigger maybe a bigger question that we can think about another time. But uh
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I like I want to off the top of my head, I want to agree with that. Like simply walking around the world map is never going to keep me in the game, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um,
But that's at the same time, that's the thing that makes me want to stay in the game. It's
yeah.
it's just I mean, especially, going to like Anne Orlando or whatever, like some of the some of the architecture and the
Yeah.
sort of like vistas you can see, but also like the emptiness of a lot of it too. Um, and like the uninteractability, which is,
Yeah.
maybe another place to talk about paradox, as we talked about last week. But there's like a paradoxical kind of like you can't do anything here, and yet you kind of like want to be around it or something.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
so striking because that's one of the things that I feel like is it always feels sad to me. Like there are these incredible spaces that are just so I love existing in them, like the Brace of the Halleck Tree area
yeah.
in Elden Ring, I think is so beautiful. And there's like actually like you can grind there pretty effectively. But
Hmm.
as soon once you traverse these levels, I always feel like what's the point of going back to them?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's a kind of sadness with like a completed file, which is never actually completed because I don't like New Game Plus. I don't like how it changes the balance, of everything.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so I like to just stay in the first run with whatever level I'm at, with whatever build I'm at. And it's fun to go like test my build or mess with the build for a few minutes. But yeah, I find it really hard to just go back to retraverse spaces when I know there's nothing there that's better than what I have. So maybe I'm just like a rotted brain like gamer who just cares about rewards at this point.
Well, no,
Um,
I think it's that you can't play it again for the first time, I mean,
yeah,
and I think there's a certain extent that you can do that by just beginning an entirely new file, maybe, or like, putting it down for a year and then coming back to it. But I mean, you can't ever go through that place for the first time. I think that's exactly what it is. This is like an issue that goes beyond the game into like a more like real thing that we experience as people who, you know, engage with art. Uh,
yeah,
and I think that's again, that's why I think it's interesting to like talk about our experiences with the games in a more practical sense like that.
yeah, for sure.
Um, cool. Do you want to wrap it up here?
Yeah, this is a good place as any to wrap, I think. I feel like we should definitely keep these threads going.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'll stop recording here.